All right, we talk a lot of conference realignment, but it's usually from the ACC perspective. What's happening on that side of things? And I don't know how much conference realignment talk happens from the SEC or the Big 10 perspective of, okay, what teams or what newcomers may join our conference. So if you could pick any two teams, you personally, as a fan, as somebody who covers a team in the SEC and then covers the SEC in general, Blake Ruffino of Are You Serious Sports, what two teams are you picking right now?
I'm not saying this because you're here. I would pick Florida State as one. I don't kill me on this. I'd pick North Carolina as two.
No, I don't care. I don't bother me.
Because look, I do think that as bad at times as North Carolina has been in football, the SEC, and this is the biggest misconception, TJ, that I think people don't understand. It's not the only sport. And look at women's basketball. Look at basketball in general. Yeah. Look at just different things that the SEC has been pushing forward, and the fan base has been rampant. I mean, TJ, I'm going to use this as an analogy. When the teams went to Omaha last year, there were 3 SEC teams that went there. You want to know the 3 teams that had the biggest fan bases in Omaha last year? All 3 of them were SEC teams. No. It wasn't Wake Forest, which I don't know if have you ever met a Wake Forest fan, TJ, by the way?
There's only like 3 of them that live in my mentions on Twitter.
Okay, so there is none. I think that North Carolina, from a brand perspective, gets you more brand recognition, which is what Greg Sankey wants. It's what I would want. And they bring a big basketball power. That's the 2 that I would go after. But here's the interesting thing. We talked about conference realignment on Ruffino and Joe show last night because of the Florida State stuff and the court and the dismissal and all that kind of stuff. I just don't know if it's smart for any ACC team right now. And this is the point that I've been trying to make. I don't know. 2026, the ESPN can void that ACC deal. Like Ross Dellinger, Pete Thamel have reported that. Wait it out. Because what's going to happen is, you know what's going to happen. Sankey and Tony Batiti are going to take their pick of the litter. TJ, we have reported that Tony Batiti and Greg Sankey have been together 5 times in the last 3 months. What are you discussing? Okay, it's got to be about realignment.
Oh,
right?
They're playing House of Cards with it. You take this, we'll take this. You take this, 100%.
1,000%.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to throw out a big thing to you that I don't know if you as a Florida State fan or people will agree. I don't know if I don't go independent. If I'm a team like Florida State, let me tell you a reason. We talked about this last night. Can you hear me? Yeah, I got the interns in here. Hold on. Yes, that's what I'm
Blake's working his kids. Send them kids to school, bro.
My 5-year-old's handing me papers. TJ, think about this. Notre Dame last year, and I know the playoff is a big deal. Regular season made more money than anybody in the country being an independent.
Yeah.
So I know that the playoff is a big deal, and that money, that extra $20 million is a big deal. Well, Notre Dame got $19 million more than anybody else in the country last year on a TV NBC deal. So I understand the conference realignment. The question that I would have if I'm Florida State, North Carolina, Clemson, Miami, is do you go or look at being an independent? And those are the questions you got to have. I think Greg Sankey wants North Carolina. They have an SEC network in Charlotte. I mean, one of their main offices, TJ's in Charlotte. I think that they'll go there. The question becomes for me, what do you do with the Miami? What do you do with Virginia Tech? What do you do with the Virginia? Like, those are all different kinds of questions. Does the ACC stand? You know, like, do they stand if they win this case against either one of them? I don't know any of that. But I do think that the Big 10 and SEC are going to expand, TJ. That's just how I see it. And when it happens, how it happens, I don't know. But if I'm the ACC, if I'm a team in the ACC, I wait until 2026. I'm not paying them any money personally. And then I see if I want to join a conference or go independent and see if, like, TJ, what would you do as a Florida State fan if ESPN says, you know what, we'll pay you $60 million a year to be independent. We'll televise every one of your games. Okay, and they do a Notre Dame type deal. You would take that 10 times out of 10.
Yeah.
You know, and so those are questions that I think that everybody has to ask. Now, I personally don't know if Florida State can win that case or Clemson can win their case. But here's what I do know. I know that ESPN is going to probably void that contract in 26. So what is 2 years, TJ? Like, what are we arguing about? I think that you have to be able to be in a place where you say, you know what, listen, we're going to stall this, and when 2026 comes, when ESPN voids that deal, why we can move for free, right? Like, you don't have a deal at that point. So I know that that's long-winded. You probably have much more knowledge about this, but this is just how I read it and where I see it coming from. Those are the opinions or thoughts that I would have if I'm leading any one of those institutions.
Yeah. So quick thoughts on that. I think what Florida State would like to settle for is essentially you've got the ACC buyout and you've got the grant of rights agreement, right? And the grant of rights is what can be voided, but the ACC contract, you're in that until 2036. And your buyout just to leave the ACC has nothing to do with ESPN is $120 million, right? Which is much higher than any other conference. But whether ESPN voids the agreement or not, you're going to have to pay that $120 million, like to leave the ACC. Now they are arguing that in court that the amount is kind of outrageous compared to the Big 12 and SEC and Big 10 and stuff. So I think if you're Florida State, you got to pay that $120 million anyway. And so basically what the arguments that they're levying and Clemson's levying is like, hey, that grant of rights money, like we don't owe any of that. And so like, if you're going to have to pay the $120 million one way or the other, then why not just get out this year and start making more from the SEC for the next 2 years to kind of counterbalance that. So I think that's the big answer. Is that 120 is due either way. So if you could make an additional $30 million the next 2 years in the SEC or the Big 10, it kind of eats into that somewhat.
Well, not even that now, TJ. Can you make a playoff? Because you're talking about adding another 10, 15, $20 million, depending on how far you get in a playoff now.
It's closer to 40 million at that point, 40, 50 at that point.
Right. And so, hey, I know this is a very tough subject, but you're not going to be left out of the playoffs like you were this past year.
For sure.
You're going to be in there. And Norvell and the way that they're going, okay, they're probably going to be either number one, just a playoff team if they don't win the conference, which I still think that they will. But at worst, TJ, you're going to be a top 12 team. At worst. Yeah. So there comes a point where, you know what, if you make the playoff this year, how much of that TV money that you make in the playoffs goes to paying that $120 million? Yeah. There's so many different ways to skin a cat here. I do feel for Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina. They won out. That God bless them. All right? I get it. The bottom line is I'm so tired of conference realignment in a lot of ways, but I understand. Like, hey man, we got to progress and be better. So good luck to them. But those would be the two teams though that we talked about earlier that I bring in. I would ask you a question. I know it's your show and you ask the questions. I know you're not a big Miami. You do not like Miami. What do you do with Miami?
To me, I think they have, in my opinion, right? As much as I try and give them a hard time, I was trolling them on Twitter this morning, right? I think that they have enough brand cachet to be in the Big 10, especially when you add in the fact that you get South Florida recruiting in that. Or if you're the SEC and you want to block the Big 10 from Florida, and that's kind of the angle of why you do that. Because eventually we're going to run out of Tier 1 teams. Like, we're going to run out of Florida States and Notre Dames and Clemsons and North Carolinas and those. I mean, eventually somebody's going to have to take these Tier 2s. And so if the SEC is going to expand more, or the Big 10 is going to expand more, I mean, you're going to have to run into some of those teams. So to me, I mean, Miami's worth more than a Virginia Tech. They're worth more, especially in the Big 10 where you get that Florida market, right? Obviously, the SEC already has the Florida market. So I mean, as much as I want to give them a hard time, I mean, they're still up there for me, but I've seen a lot of thoughts and a lot of trajectory of them going to the Big 12, which I think would be a death sentence. I think that would really be tough for them. But I think they're big enough to go to the Big 2 for sure.
Yeah, I think that they are too. And the question becomes, look, I know this is going to sound crazy. I listen to Dana White as an example. I'm big into UFC fighting. TJ, they've pulled most of all their fights from LA and brought them to Miami.
Yeah.
And so I do think that, when you look at that Miami just as a place, I think that, TJ, could you imagine SEC Media Days in Miami? Because they go to all of the different locations. Like, where were they at last year? I think they were in Atlanta last year or Nashville last year, whichever one that they were in. but they go to every single schools. Like, they'll probably be in New Orleans or Baton Rouge the next couple of years.
Jacksonville, or something like that. Yeah.
Right. Could you imagine them in Miami? And
Be
so,
nuts.
look, I think it's all fun, but if I'm looking at this realistically, I just think that they're going to split the ACC in a lot of different ways, and whoever wins it wins it. But look, it's just so, there's no and I don't have any faith that the people up top are going to make right decisions either.
Yeah.
I have no faith that the people at Miami can make a right decision, ESPN can make a right decision, or quite honestly, TJ, I don't think that Greg Sankey has made right decisions. I like adding Texas and Oklahoma, but like as an example, like people that are not in this conference think that everything in this conference is great. It's not great. TJ, the officiating has gotten worse. They basically flipped the schedule. They have gotten lazy. The SEC
Lazy. Schedule's terrible.
The schedule is horrible. And everybody looks at the SEC as this pinnacle. Look, I love Greg Sankey more than the next SEC homer, or what I'd be labeled as. It has gotten worse at times because of all the things that he's got to deal with. TJ, we had a guy strike out on Saturday. The ball hit the ground. Okay, and they have not fixed a lot of things. I know I'm going on a tangent with that and kind of going off on a wall, but the SEC is great from a money perspective.
I was going to say, Florida State fans will trade all those deficiencies for like $50 million. You can fix a lot of tiers with $50 million.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, one team you didn't mention, I don't know if there's a jealousy over the real Death Valley or whatever, which is LSU. Well, no Clemson in the SEC.
I wouldn't mind Clemson. But I look at North Carolina. Look, I'd say this, TJ, of what would I look at? And I think that Clemson would be right up there with me. I'd take Clemson over Miami.
Sure.
There's no question about I'd take Clemson over Miami. You have an SEC school already in that state. If I'm going to expand, though, who's going to Clemson, South Carolina? I know that SEC fans will want to go to Miami. I know that they'll want to go to Charlotte. TJ, do you know where the number one place in the country where SEC fan base is, where they reside, that's not in the SEC footprint? You know where it is? It's in Charlotte.
Yeah.
So I look at that and say, well, the two biggest TV markets for me are probably in Miami and Charlotte. I've been to Clemson. My brother lives in north of Atlanta. Went through Clemson. He brought us through Clemson. I'm like, this is
terrible.
No
offense to the Clemson people, but it's
no offense.
Nobody even goes to Clemson. You go to Greenville the night before, and then you go to Clemson the next day.
Right. So I'm just like, yeah, all right. But as a brand, though, you got to give Clemson a lot of credit. And
They've
look,
done
I'm
great.
not. TJ, they're number 2 team in baseball, and I would not hate them. I just look at North Carolina, and they've had a track record of being elite and dominant. The only question that I ask is, I know for a fact, TJ, if somebody that works in that building, I think that they're going after North Carolina more than anybody, and I'm not surprised if they wouldn't go with Duke before Clemson.
Wow.
Because I think that Sankey is trying to expand basketball-wise. He's got the best football brand in the country.
Yeah.
I think he's trying to expand basketball-wise more than anything. So, but Clemson was in an Elite Eight. What the hell am I talking about?
They've done a little bit better job. It is proof that football money comes in, and your other sports can get good. You mentioned their soccer. I know non-rev, but soccer won the national championship. Their men's soccer team in the Elite Eight with basketball.
Right.
Baseball has the number 1 RPI in the country right now. They're ranked number 2. And then football, what I am interested with football, and this is a whole nother discussion that we'll get to another time, but I am interested in what like a post Dabo Clemson looks like, right? Like what does that look like? That's probably 7 episodes on its own, but because we don't know, but does somebody just pick that up and keep it going the way that it is? Or is it because we would have said, what does a post urban Florida look like? Well, you certainly wouldn't think what it's looked like the last 10 years.
Look like?
Yeah. So that's a big question because Dabo's done a phenomenal job. And even though we give him a hard time for the portal and this, that, and the other, he's done a great job. What is a post Dabo? That's the next episode. So, Blake, where can people follow you and find your work and all those things?
AYS Sports on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. whatever your social media, podcast, whatever you want to do it, AYS Sports or Rufino and Joe Show, RUFFINO. Me and Joe debate a lot. We argue a lot on there. So you can find us in either one of those.
It's a good show. I enjoy it. So thank you very much for coming on, man. I appreciate it.
He makes my blood pressure way too much.
It's good for you. So thanks, man. I appreciate you, buddy.
No problem, man. Thank you for having me.
You bet.